In the shadowed halls of Greystone Manor, a single scream pierces the night Lady Evelyn lies dead in her beloved rose garden, a tarnished silver brooch glinting 10 feet from her lifeless form. Poison courses through her veins. But who wielded it? Was it her estranged sister, hiding a bitter grudge? Her reckless son, tangled in risky ventures? Or the trusted doctor, whose secrets are darker than the manor's shadows? As whispers of betrayal and hidden truths ripple through the closed circle of suspects, only one mind can unravel the puzzle. Miss Marple, with her keen eyes and relentless logic. Why was the brooch left behind? What secret does a forgotten spoon conceal? And what truth did Lady Evelyn take to her grave? Step into a world of elegance and deceit, where every clue matters, and the killer is closer than you think. Chapter 1. The gathering at Crestwood Manor. The late summer sun cast a golden haze over Crestwood Manor, a sprawling Georgian estate nestled in the rolling hills of Devonshire. Its ivy-clad walls and manicured gardens exuded an air of timeless gentility, yet beneath the polished veneer, a quiet unease simmered. The occasion was the annual summer gathering of the Ashburn family, a tradition unbroken for 3 generations. Though this year's assembly promised more than the usual exchange of pleasantries, and CLARET. Miss Jane Marple, seated in a wicker chair on the terrace, adjusted her lace shawl and surveyed the scene with her characteristic unobtrusive gaze. She had been invited as a guest of Mrs. Eleanor Ashburn, the widowed matriarch of the family, who had taken a liking to Miss Marple during a chance meeting at a church bazaar in St. Mary Mead. Eleanor, a woman of 60 with a penchant for nostalgia, had insisted that Miss Marple's shrewd mind would enliven the gathering. Miss Marple, ever polite, had accepted, though she suspected Eleanor's invitation stemmed from a desire for an impartial observer amid familial tensions. The terrace was abuzz with the Ashburn clan and their associates. Eleanor presided over the group with practiced grace, her silver hair gleaming as she poured tea from a Wedgwood pot. Her eldest son, Reginald Ashburn, a robust man of 45 with a military bearing, stood by the balustrade, discussing politics with his cousin, Dr. Lionel Hayes, a weary physician whose nervous gestures betrayed a restless mind. Reginald's wife, Clara, a statuesque beauty with a penchant for Parisian fashion, chatted animatedly with Sylvia Pennington, a young novelist whose sharp wit masked a guarded demeanor. Nearby, Eleanor's younger son, Edmund Ashburn, lounged in a chair, his boyish charm tempered by a sullen expression. At 32, Edmund had yet to find his place in the world, a fact that seemed to weigh heavily on him as he sipped his gin and tonic. His fiancée, Beatrice Lyle, a delicate woman with auburn hair and a nervous laugh, clung to his arm, her eyes darting toward the others as if seeking approval. Completing the circle was Mr. Victor Grayson, a solicitor from London with a penchant for pompous monologues, and his wife, Margaret, whose quiet demeanor and watchful eyes suggested she missed little. Miss Marple's companion for the weekend, Captain Arthur Hastings, sipped his tea and leaned toward her. A fine lot, don't you think, Miss Marple? Though I dare say there's a touch of frost in the air despite the sunshine. Miss Marple's eyes twinkled behind her spectacles. Indeed, Captain Hastings. Families, you know, are like village knitting circles full of knots and tangles. Beneath the surface, One only needs to observe the stitches to see where the pattern frays. Hastings chuckled. Accustomed to Miss Marple's penchant for drawing parallels between the mundane and the profound, he had joined her at Eleanor's insistence, partly to escape the monotony of London and partly because he found Miss Marple's company invigorating. Her ability to unravel human nature with the precision of a seamstress never ceased to amaze him. The afternoon progressed with the usual rituals of a country house gathering: croquet on the lawn, polite conversation about the weather, and veiled barbs disguised as compliments. Yet Miss Marple noted certain peculiarities. Reginald's brusque dismissal of Edmund's suggestion to sell a portion of the estate hinted at deeper financial strain. Clara's forced laughter at Sylvia's jest suggested a rivalry, perhaps rooted in envy of the younger woman's rising fame. Dr. Hayes's frequent glances at his watch, and Beatrice's fidgeting with a tarnished silver brooch pinned to her dress spoke of private anxieties. As the sun dipped below the horizon, the party retired to the drawing room for drinks before dinner. The room, with its mahogany paneling and crystal chandelier, exuded opulence, but the atmosphere grew strained. Eleanor, ever the gracious hostess, raised her glass to toast the family's unity. But her words faltered when Edmund muttered something inaudible and stormed out, leaving Beatrice pale and trembling. "Dreadful boy," Reginald muttered, his face reddening, always causing a scene. Clara placed a hand on his arm. "Let him be, darling. He's young and foolish." Miss Marple, seated near the fireplace, observed the exchange with interest. She noted the way Beatrice's fingers tightened around her brooch, the way Dr. Hayes's eyes followed Edmund's departure, and the way Victor Grayson's lips curled into a faint, knowing smile. Dinner was a formal affair, served in the dining room under the watchful gaze of ancestral portraits. The conversation turned to the Ashburn family heirlooms, including a collection of jewelry housed in a locked display case in Eleanor's study. The centerpiece was the famed Ashburn sapphire, a gem said to be cursed after its acquisition. During the Raj, Eleanor laughed off the superstition, but Miss Marple noted the unease that flickered across Beatrice's face at the mention of the sapphire. As the clock struck 9, a piercing scream shattered the decorum. The guests froze, their faces a tableau of shock. Hastings leapt to his feet, following Reginald and Dr. Hayes as they rushed toward the source of the sound, the study. Miss Marple followed at a measured pace, her knitting bag tucked under her arm. In the study, they found Beatrice crumpled on the floor, her face ashen, her hand clutching the tarnished brooch. The display case stood open, the Ashburn sapphire gone. Dr. Hayes knelt beside Beatrice, pronouncing her unconscious, but alive. Eleanor, trembling, pointed to a blood-stained letter opener on the desk. "Good heavens," she whispered. "What has happened here?" Miss Marple's eyes swept the room, taking in the open window, the overturned chair, and the faint smear of mud on the carpet. "A great deal, Mrs. Ashburn," she said softly, "and I suspect we shall find it is only the beginning." As the household erupted into chaos, Miss Marple remained calm, her mind already sifting through the details like threads in a tapestry. Someone in this closed circle had acted with purpose, and she intended to discover who and why. Chapter 2. The shadow of a Crimith study at Crestwood Manor was a scene of controlled pandemonium. As the household grappled with the shock of Beatrice Lyle's collapse and the disappearance of the Ashburn sapphire, the air was thick with the scent of old books and wax polish, now tinged with the metallic tang of blood from the letter opener on the desk. Miss Jane Marple stood near the doorway, her slight figure almost invisible amid the flurry of activity, yet her sharp eyes missed nothing. Captain Hastings, ever eager to be of use, hovered near Dr. Lionel Hayes, who was tending to Beatrice as she stirred on the Persian rug. "Steady now," Dr. Hayes murmured, his thin fingers checking Beatrice's pulse. "She's coming round." A faint, likely from shock. Eleanor Ashburn, her face pale but composed, clutched a handkerchief. Shock? But what happened to her? And the sapphire gone? This is unthinkable. Reginald Ashburn, his military demeanor strained, barked at the butler, Mr. Perkins, who had appeared in the doorway. "Perkins, fetch the police at once and lock the doors. No one leaves this house until we know what's what." Miss Marple noted the butler's hesitation, a fleeting flicker of unease in his eyes, before he nodded and retreated. She stepped forward, her voice gentle but firm. "If I may, Mrs. Ashburn, it would be wise to preserve the room as it is until the authorities arrive. The smallest detail may prove significant." Eleanor nodded, her trust in Miss Marple's quiet authority evident. "Of course, Jane, you're quite right. Oh, this is dreadful." Hastings, his brow furrowed, whispered to Miss Marple, "Looks like a robbery gone wrong, don't you think?" Poor Miss Lyle must have interrupted the thief. Miss Marple's lips pursed slightly, her knitting needles clicking softly in her hands. "Perhaps, Captain Hastings, but a thief who leaves a blood-stained letter opener and an unconscious woman? That is a story with too many loose threads." Beatrice, now propped against a chair, with a glass of water in her trembling hands, spoke in a faint voice. I came to the study to fetch a book. The door was ajar, and then everything went dark." Her fingers tightened around the tarnished brooch pinned to her dress, its dull silver catching the lamplight. Miss Marple's gaze lingered on the brooch, its intricate design a rose entwined with thorns seeming oddly out of place on Beatrice's otherwise elegant attire. "You saw no one, Miss Lyle?" she asked kindly. Beatrice shook her head, her auburn curls falling limply. "No one. I swear it." Dr. Hayes interjected, his tone clipped. "She needs rest, not questions. I'll take her to her room." He helped Beatrice to her feet, guiding her out as the others watched in silence. Clara Ashburn, her eyes narrowed, muttered to her husband, "She's hiding something, Reginald. That girl's always been nervy, but this is too convenient." Reginald grunted, his gaze fixed on the open window. "Thief came through there, mark my words. Climbed the ivy, broke in and scarpered with the sapphire." Miss Marple, unnoticed by the others, knelt to examine the carpet near the window. A faint smear of mud, barely noticeable, trailed from the sill to the desk. She rose, her expression thoughtful, and turned to Sylvia Pennington, who stood apart, her sharp eyes taking in the scene like a writer cataloging details for a novel. "Miss Pennington," Miss Marple said, "you have a keen eye for observation, I'm told. Did you notice anything unusual this evening?" Before the scream, Sylvia's lips curved into a wry smile. "Only the usual undercurrents, Miss Marple. Edmund sulking, Clarice sniping, and Victor Grayson pontificating about estate law. Nothing out of the ordinary for this family. Miss Marple nodded, undeterred by Sylvia's flippancy, and yet something extraordinary has occurred. A sapphire does not vanish, nor a woman faint, without cause. The arrival of the local police, led by Inspector Crawley, a stout man with a no-nonsense air, shifted the room's focus. He surveyed the study, his eyes lingering on the blood-stained letter opener. Right, then, looks like a botched robbery. Miss Lyle's lucky to be alive. We'll need statements from everyone. And you, madam. He turned to Eleanor. Can you confirm the value of this sapphire? Eleanor's voice trembled. Priceless, Inspector. It's been in the family for generations. My late husband's grandfather acquired it in India. It's irreplaceable, Inspector Crawley scribbled in his notebook. And enemies, anyone who'd want to harm your family, Reginald snorted. Enemies? Half the county's jealous of our name, but no one dare. Miss Marple, standing quietly by the fireplace, noted the quick glance Victor Grayson exchanged with his wife, Margaret, whose usually placid face tightened momentarily. She also observed Edmund, who had returned to the room, his expression a mix of defiance and guilt as he avoided his mother's gaze. The inspector, satisfied with his initial survey, began taking statements. Hastings, eager to assist, recounted the evening's events, though Miss Marple noticed he omitted the tension at dinner. She made a mental note to ask him later, for Hastings, dear though he was, often missed the subtleties of human behavior. As the police cordoned off the study, Miss Marple slipped into the hallway, where she found Mr. Perkins polishing a silver tray with unnecessary vigor. Mr. Perkins, she said softly, you've served the Ashburns for many years, I understand. He started, nearly dropping the tray. 20 years, miss, since Mrs. Ashburn's husband was alive. A loyal service, Miss Marple said, her eyes kind but searching. You must know the family's ways well. Did you see anyone near the study before the scream? Perkins hesitated, his fingers tightening on the cloth. No, miss. I was in the kitchen, preparing the drinks tray. Miss Marple smiled, her expression disarming. Of course. But you know, in my village, St. Mary Mead, servants often see more than they're credited for. A glance, a shadow, it can mean so much. Perkins's face flushed, and he busied himself with the tray. I saw nothing, miss, if you'll excuse me. Miss Marple watched him retreat, her mind turning over the details. The mud on the carpet, the open window, the blood on the letter opener, and Beatrice's tarnished brooch. The pieces did not yet fit, but she felt the familiar stir of certainty that they would, in time. Back in the drawing room, the guests had gathered, their faces a mix of fear, suspicion, and exhaustion. Eleanor, ever the hostess, offered tea, though her hands shook as she poured. Clara whispered to Sylvia, who scribbled notes in a small notebook, her novelist's instincts undimmed by the crisis. Victor Grayson held forth on the legal implications of theft, while Margaret watched him with an unreadable expression. Edmund, slouched in a corner, avoided Beatrice, who sat pale and silent, her brooch glinting faintly. Hastings sidled up to Miss Marple. What do you make of it, Miss Marple? A thief from outside, or someone closer? Miss Marple's eyes gleaned. In a house like this, Captain Hastings, the truth is rarely an outsider. It hides in plain sight, in the habits and hesitations of those we see every day. We must simply look closer. As the clock struck 11, Inspector Crawley announced that no one was to leave Crestwood Manor until morning, when a full investigation would begin. The guests retired to their rooms, their footsteps echoing in the silent halls. Miss Marple, however, remained awake, her knitting needles clicking rhythmically as she pondered the evening's events. A crime had been committed, but whether it was theft, assault, or something darker, she could not yet say. One thing was certain: the tarnished brooch and the secrets it held would lead her to the truth. Chapter 3. The arrival of Curiosity. Morning after the tumult at Crestwood Manor dawned. With a deceptive calm, the Devonshire hills bathed in a soft mist that clung to the estate's gardens. Like a whispered secret, inside, the household stirred uneasily, the events of the previous night casting a pall over the usual breakfast rituals. Miss Jane Marple, seated at the dining table, with a cup of tea and a modest slice of toast, observed the gathered company with her usual unobtrusive keenness. Her lace shawl draped neatly over her shoulders, she appeared as unremarkable as ever. Yet her mind was a whirl of connections, piecing together the threads of the mystery. Captain Hastings, ever her loyal companion, sat beside her, his brow furrowed, as he buttered a scone. "Dashed on business, Miss Marple," he murmured, keeping his voice low. "The police are poking about, but they seem fixated on that open window. I say, it's too neat, don't you think?" Miss Marple's eyes twinkled behind her spectacles. "Neatness, Captain Hastings, is often a sign of artifice. In my village, St. Mary Mead, when a thing looks too perfect, it's usually hiding a flaw. We must look for the imperfections." The dining room was a study in strained civility. Eleanor Ashburn, her face drawn but resolute, presided over the table, urging her guests to eat despite the palpable tension. Reginald Ashburn, his military posture rigid, stabbed at his eggs with unnecessary force, his eyes darting to his younger brother, Edmund, who slouched in his chair, avoiding conversation. Clara Ashburn, resplendent in a silk morning dress, made brittle small talk with Sylvia Pennington, whose sharp gaze flitted from face to face, as if collecting material for her next novel. Dr. Lionel Hayes, his nervous energy barely contained, sipped his coffee in quick, jerky motions, while Beatrice Lyle, pale and subdued, toyed with her tarnished brooch, her fingers tracing its thorny rose design. Victor Grayson, the solicitor, pontificated about the need for a thorough inventory of the estate's valuables, while his wife, Margaret, sat silently, her watchful eyes missing nothing. Inspector Crawley had arrived early, accompanied by a young constable named Willis, who was taking notes with earnest diligence. The inspector, his manner brisk, addressed the group as they finished their meal. "We've searched the grounds and found no sign of an intruder. The mud on the study carpet matches the soil outside, but there's no clear footprint. Miss Lyle's statement is all we have for now, and it's thin. I'll need to speak with each of you again today. No one leaves the manor until we're satisfied." Reginald bristled. "This is outrageous, Inspector. We're not criminals. The thief came from outside. Mark my words." Miss Marple, stirring, Her tea noted the quick glance Beatrice cast at Edmund, who stared resolutely at his plate. She also observed Clara's faint smirk, as if she found her husband's indignation amusing. Sylvia Pennington leaned forward, her voice laced with curiosity. "Inspector, what about the blood on the letter opener? Surely that suggests something more than a simple theft." Crawley's eyes narrowed. "We're testing it now. Could be Miss Lyle's, could be someone else's. We'll know soon enough." As the inspector moved to question Eleanor privately, Miss Marple rose, her movements deliberate. "Captain Hastings, would you care for a turn in the garden? The air might clear our thoughts." Hastings, catching the glint in her eye, nodded eagerly. "Splendid idea, Miss Marple." The gardens of Crestwood Manor were a labyrinth of rose beds and gravel paths, bordered by ancient yews. As they strolled, Miss Marple paused to admire a cluster of late-blooming roses, her fingers brushing the petals. "You know, Captain, roses are much like people. They have their beauty, but also their thorns hidden until you look closely." Hastings chuckled. "You're onto something, aren't you? What's caught your eye?" Miss Marple's voice was soft but precise. "Several things, Captain. The mud on the carpet, for instance. It was faint. Too faint for someone fleeing in haste. And the letter opener, why leave it behind, bloodied, when it could so easily be taken? Then there's Miss Lyle's brooch. It's an odd piece for a young woman of her means, don't you think? Tarnished, yet she clings to it." Hastings frowned. "You think the brooch is significant? I think everything is significant until proven otherwise," Miss Marple replied. "In St. Mary Mead, I once knew a girl who wore a locket she never opened. It turned out to hold a secret that changed everything. People wear their truths, Captain, even when they don't mean to." Their walk took them near the study's exterior window, where the ivy clung thickly to the manor's wall. Miss Marple paused, her eyes scanning the ground. A few crushed leaves and a snapped twig caught her attention, but the soil beneath was undisturbed, save for a faint scuff near the base of the ivy. She bent down, her movements spry despite her age, and picked up a small, glinting object half buried in the dirt, a cufflink, engraved with the initials EAA. Hastings mused, peering over her shoulder. "Edmund Ashburn, perhaps, or Eleanor Ashburn," Miss Marple said, mildly, "or someone wishing us to think so. We mustn't jump to conclusions, Captain." Returning to the house, they found the household in the drawing room where Inspector Crawley was questioning Edmund. The young man's sullen demeanor had hardened into defiance. "I was in my room, Inspector, reading. I didn't go near the study. Ask Beatrice, she'll tell you." Beatrice, seated nearby, flinched. I don't know where Edmund was. I was in the library before I went to the study." Crawley's eyes sharpened. "And you, Mr. Ashburn, can't account for your whereabouts between 8 and 9 last night." Edmund's jaw tightened. "I don't need to. I didn't steal the blasted sapphire." Miss Marple, settling into an armchair, opened her knitting bag and began to work, her needles clicking rhythmically. She listened as the inspector moved on to Clara, who claimed to have been in the conservatory, admiring the orchids, and Sylvia, who said she was in her room, writing. Dr. Hayes insisted he was in the billiard room, practicing alone, while Victor, and Margaret Grayson both vouched for each other, saying they were discussing business in the library. The alibis, Miss Marple noted, were vague, each person's account studiously solitary. She glanced at Beatrice, whose fingers still toyed with the brooch. "Miss Lyle," she said gently, "that brooch of yours is quite striking. A family heirloom, perhaps." Beatrice's hand froze, her eyes darting to Miss Marple. It was my mother's. Nothing special, just sentimental." Miss Marple nodded, her smile disarming. "Sentiment is a powerful thing. It binds us to the past, doesn't it?" Beatrice looked away, her expression unreadable. Hastings, sensing Miss Marple's interest, whispered, "You're like a bloodhound, Miss Marple. That brooch again." "Not just the brooch," she murmured. "It's the way she holds it, as if it's both a comfort and a burden. And then there's the cufflink, and the mud that isn't quite muddy enough. We are only at the beginning, Captain." As the morning wore on, Inspector Crawley announced that the blood on the letter opener was human, though not Beatrice's. The revelation sent a ripple of unease through the room. Eleanor gasped, clutching her handkerchief, while Reginald's face darkened. Sylvia's pen paused over her notebook, and Dr. Hayes's hands trembled slightly as he adjusted his glasses. Miss Marple, her knitting needles never faltering, felt the familiar thrill of a puzzle taking shape. The theft of the sapphire was no simple robbery, and the blood suggested a deeper crime. Someone in this closed circle was lying, and she was determined to find out who before the truth claimed another victim. Chapter 4. The questions begin. Morning sun filtered through the heavy drapes of Greystone Manor's drawing room, casting long, golden slants across the polished oak floor. The air was thick with the scent of old wood and wax polish, overlaid with a faint tang of unease that seemed to cling to the walls. Miss Marple sat in a high-backed chair near the fireplace, her hands folded neatly in her lap, her eyes sharp and attentive behind her spectacles. To the uninitiated, she might have appeared a harmless old spinster, her knitting needles clicking softly in rhythm with the ticking of the mantel clock. But to those who knew her, Captain Hastings included, her presence was as formidable as a storm gathering on the horizon. Captain Hastings stood by the window, his hands clasped behind his back, watching the gravel drive, where Inspector Japp's men were still combing the grounds for evidence. The discovery of Lady Evelyn's body in the rose garden the previous evening had sent a shockwave through the manor, and now, with the coroner's initial report confirming poison as the cause of death, the house buzzed with a nervous energy that no amount of tea or decorum could suppress. Miss Marple had arrived late the previous night, summoned by a discreet telegram from Sir Reginald, who had heard of her reputation through a mutual acquaintance in St. Mary Mead. She had wasted no time taking a room in the manor and requesting a full account of the evening's events from Hastings, who had been only too happy to comply. Now, as the clock struck 10, she had gathered the household for what she called a little chat. The suspects, for that was what they were, though no one dared say it aloud, sat in a semicircle before her. Sir Reginald, his face pale and drawn, occupied the armchair nearest the fire, his fingers drumming restlessly on the armrest. Beside him, his son, Charles, slouched with an air of defiance, his eyes darting between Miss Marple and the door as if contemplating escape. Mrs. Clara Winthrop, Lady Evelyn's sister, sat ramrod straight, her black morning dress a stark contrast to her pale, tear-streaked face. Her husband, Dr. Harold Winthrop, hovered protectively at her side, his medical bag placed conspicuously on the floor as if to remind everyone of his profession. Miss Beatrice Langley, the young governess, perched on the edge of her chair, her hands twisting a handkerchief into knots, and finally, Mr. Ernest Caldwell, the solicitor, sat with a ledger open before him, his pen poised as if to record every word. Though his eyes betrayed a flicker of unease, Miss Marple's gaze moved slowly over the group, lingering on each face as if reading a book whose pages were written in glances and gestures. "It is a sad business, this," she began, her voice soft but clear, carrying the weight of authority. Lady Evelyn was a woman of great charm and vitality, and her loss is felt deeply by us all. But it is my duty, our duty, to uncover the truth of what happened in the Rose Garden last night. I shall ask each of you to recount your movements from 8 o'clock until the moment Lady Evelyn was found. Let us be precise, for the truth often hides in the smallest details. Hastings, standing by the window, suppressed a smile. He had seen Miss Marple at work before, and he knew this gentle request was the prelude to a dissection of alibis. As meticulous as a surgeon's scalpel, Sir Reginald spoke first, his voice gruff. "I was in my study from 8 until nearly 9, going over estate accounts with Caldwell. We heard nothing unusual until the scream Miss Langley's. I believe at around 9:15. Mr. Caldwell nodded, his pen scratching briefly in his ledger. "That's correct, Sir Reginald, and I were discussing the transfer of certain assets to Lady Evelyn's trust. We were quite engrossed." Miss Marple's eyes flickered to the solicitor. "And you, Mr. Caldwell, you remained in the study the entire time?" Caldwell adjusted his spectacles. "Indeed, madam, I had no reason to leave. The accounts were complex, and Sir Reginald was most particular about the details." Miss Marple nodded, her expression unreadable. "And you, Mr. Charles?" Charles shifted uncomfortably, running a hand through his dark hair. "I was in the billiard room, playing a solitary game. I'd had a bit of a row with Mother earlier. She was always on about my investments, and I needed to clear my head. I didn't see anyone until I heard Beatrice scream." Miss Marple's needles paused for a fraction of a second. "A solitary game, you say? No one passed by the billiard room? No servants, perhaps?" "No one," Charles said quickly, though his eyes flicked to the floor. Mrs. Winthrop spoke next, her voice trembling but resolute. "I was in the library, reading. Harold Dr. Winthrop was with me until about 8:30, when he went to check on his medical supplies in the guest room. I stayed until I heard the commotion." Dr. Winthrop cleared his throat as Clara said, "I was in the guest room, organizing my bag. I'm afraid I'm rather particular about my instruments. I rejoined her just before 9, and we were together when we heard Miss Langley." Miss Marple turned her gaze to Beatrice, who seemed to shrink under the scrutiny. "And you, Miss Langley, your scream alerted the household, I understand." Beatrice's voice was barely above a whisper. "I was in the conservatory, tending to the orchids. Lady Evelyn loved them, and she'd asked me to check on them after dinner. I went out to the Rose Garden at about 9 to fetch some clippings for an arrangement. That's when I found her. Her voice broke, and she pressed the handkerchief to her lips. Miss Marple's eyes softened, but only for a moment. You were alone in the conservatory, then, and you saw no one else in the garden. No one, Beatrice said, her voice steadier now. It was dark, and the garden was quiet. I only saw Lady Evelyn when I tripped over her. The room fell silent, the weight of the word murder hanging unspoken in the air. Miss Marple leaned forward slightly, her needles resuming their rhythm. Thank you all. Your accounts are most helpful. But there is one detail I find curious. The brooch Lady Evelyn was wearing, a tarnished silver piece with a sapphire, I believe was found some distance from her body, near the edge of the rose garden. Can any of you tell me why it might have been there? A ripple of unease passed through the room. Sir Reginald frowned. Charles looked away, and Mrs. Winthrop's hand tightened on her husband's arm. Mr. Caldwell's pen froze mid-stroke, and Beatrice's handkerchief twisted tighter. It was an old thing, Sir Reginald said at last. Evelyn wore it for sentiment, not value. Perhaps it fell off in a struggle. Perhaps, Miss Marple said, her tone neutral. But the clasp was intact, was it not? Captain Hastings, caught off guard, nodded. Yes, Miss Marple. Inspector Japp noted it was in perfect working order. Miss Marple smiled faintly, a curious detail. Then, a brooch does not simply fall from a dress and land 10 feet away. Unless it was placed there or thrown. The room seemed to grow colder, though the fire crackled steadily. Miss Marple's eyes swept over the group once more, lingering on each face as if memorizing every twitch and glance. We shall speak again soon, she said, rising with a grace that belied her age. For now, I should like to see the rose garden myself. Captain Hastings, will you accompany me? Hastings nodded, following her out of the drawing room and into the crisp morning air. As they walked toward the rose garden, he couldn't help but feel a thrill of anticipation. Miss Marple was building her case, piece by piece, and he knew that somewhere in the tangle of alibis and half-truths, she had already glimpsed the shape of the truth. Chapter 5. The Red Herrings. The rose garden at Greystone Manor was a study in ordered beauty, its neatly trimmed hedges and vibrant blooms a testament to Lady Evelyn's meticulous care. But on this crisp morning, the garden felt more like a stage for tragedy, its serene paths marred by the memory of her lifeless form. Miss Marple walked slowly along the gravel path, her small, precise steps crunching softly, her eyes darting from the rose bushes to the ground and back again. Captain Hastings followed, his hands in his pockets, his mind racing to keep up with the old lady's unspoken deductions. Observe, Hastings, Miss Marple said, pausing near the spot where Lady Evelyn's body had been found. She pointed to a patch of earth, slightly disturbed, where the tarnished silver brooch had been discovered. The ground here is soft, yet there are no deep impressions of a struggle, and the brooch, so curiously placed 10 feet from where she fell, it is not the sort of thing one misplaces by accident. Hastings frowned, crouching to examine the spot. You think someone deliberately placed it there to mislead us? Miss Marple's lips twitched in a faint smile. The human mind, Hastings, is a curious thing. It seeks to cover its tracks with distractions, much like a conjurer on a stage. But we must not be distracted. Come, let us return to the house. There are threads to unravel." Back in the drawing room, the atmosphere had grown heavier, as if the weight of suspicion had settled into the very furniture. Inspector Japp had arrived, his notebook open and his expression one of grim determination. He was a man of action, and his presence brought a new energy to the investigation. He stood before the assembled household, his voice clipped and authoritative. "We've got a clear lead," Japp announced, his eyes narrowing as they settled on Charles Langston. "Young Mr. Langston, your argument with your mother last night was overheard by the housemaid, Mary. She says it was quite heated, something about money and your investments. Care to explain?" Charles flushed, his hands clenching into fists. "It was nothing out of the ordinary. Mother was always on about my finances. She thought I was reckless. But it was just a disagreement. I wouldn't what?" Japp pressed, stepping closer. "Poison her. We found traces of cyanide in her system, and you were seen near the dining room where her evening tea was prepared. Convenient, wouldn't you say?" The room stirred. Mrs. Winthrop gasped, her hand flying to her mouth, while Dr. Winthrop's face darkened. Beatrice Langley's eyes widened, and Mr. Caldwell's pen scratched furiously in his ledger. Sir Reginald rose, his voice trembling with indignation. "Now see here, Inspector. My son may be a fool with money, but he's no murderer." Miss Marple, seated quietly in her corner, watched the scene unfold with the calm detachment of a scientist observing a chemical reaction. Her knitting needles clicked steadily, a counterpoint to the rising tension. Hastings, standing beside her, leaned in and whispered, "Japp seems convinced Charles is our man. Do you think he's right?" Miss Marple's eyes twinkled behind her spectacles. "Inspector Japp is a good man, Hastings, but he is sometimes too quick to seize the obvious. Charles is a convenient suspect, too convenient. Perhaps we must look beyond the surface." As Japp continued to question Charles, pressing him on his whereabouts and his access to the kitchen, Miss Marple's attention drifted to the others. Mrs. Winthrop's tears had dried, and she now sat with a strange rigidity, her eyes fixed on her husband. Dr. Winthrop, in turn, seemed overly attentive, his hand resting on hers in a way that felt more possessive than comforting. Beatrice, meanwhile, kept her gaze on the floor, her handkerchief now a crumpled ball in her lap, and Mr. Caldwell, ever the observer, scribbled notes with a fervor that suggested he was recording more than just the conversation. "Mr. Charles," Miss Marple interjected suddenly, her voice cutting through Japp's interrogation like a bell in a storm. "You mentioned playing billiards alone. Did you, perhaps, open the window in the billiard room? It was a warm evening, after all." Charles blinked, caught off guard. Yes, I suppose I did. It was stuffy, and I wanted some air. And, did you notice anything unusual outside? A sound, perhaps, or a shadow in the garden?" Charles hesitated, his brow furrowing. "No, nothing. It was quiet. Just the usual night sounds, crickets, that sort of thing." Miss Marple nodded, her expression unreadable. "Thank you, Mr. Charles. That is most illuminating." Japp shot her a glance, clearly irritated by the interruption, but he pressed on, turning his attention to Dr. Winthrop. "Doctor, you're a medical man. Cyanide's not something you'd keep in your bag, I presume. Dr. Winthrop's face tightened. Of course not, Inspector. My supplies are for healing, not harming. I keep standard medications, bandages, and instruments, nothing more. And yet, Jap said, flipping through his notebook, the butler mentioned you were seen in the kitchen at around 8, fetching a glass of water. Odd place to get water, isn't it? With all the decanters in the dining room? Dr. Winthrop's jaw clenched, but his voice remained steady. I wanted fresh water, not stale. The kitchen tap is the best source. I saw nothing suspicious, and I certainly didn't tamper with anyone's tea. Miss Marple's needles paused for a moment, her eyes narrowing slightly. Dr. Winthrop, you mentioned organizing your medical bag in the guest room. Did you, by chance, notice the time when you returned to the library? Dr. Winthrop frowned, as if the question puzzled him. It was just before 9, I believe. I didn't check the clock precisely. Curious, Miss Marple murmured, almost to herself. The library clock is quite prominent, is it not? One would think it difficult to miss. The room fell silent, the weight of her words settling over the group like a fog. Jap, sensing the shift, cleared his throat and announced that he would be conducting a thorough search of the manor, starting with Charles's room. As the household dispersed, Miss Marple rose and approached Hastings, her voice low. Hastings, my dear friend, the red herrings are plentiful today. Charles's argument and Dr. Winthrop's kitchen visit are convenient distractions, but they lack finesse. The truth lies in the details we have not yet seen. I should like to examine the kitchen myself. Will you join me? Hastings nodded, his curiosity piqued, as they made their way to the kitchen. He couldn't shake the feeling that Miss Marple was already several steps ahead, her mind weaving a tapestry of clues that would soon ensnare the guilty. The question was not whether she would find the truth, but how many more lies would surface before she did. Chapter 6. A clue in detailed kitchen at Greystone Manor was a cavernous space, its flagstone floor worn smooth by decades of bustling servants. Copper pots gleamed on hooks above the long oak table, and the faint scent of herbs lingered in the air, mingling with the sharp tang of cleaning polish. Miss Marple stood near the stove, her small figure almost comically out of place among the utilitarian surroundings. Yet her presence commanded the room. Captain Hastings hovered nearby, watching as she examined a tray of teacups with the precision of a jeweler inspecting a rare gem. Observe, Hastings, Miss Marple said, her voice low but clear. She held up a delicate porcelain cup, its rim faintly stained with a residue that had escaped the maid's scrubbing. This is the cup from which Lady Evelyn drank her evening tea, the coroner confirmed. Cyanide. Yet the cup was washed before Inspector Jap's men could examine it. A curious oversight, don't you think? Hastings frowned, peering at the cup. You think the maid was careless or deliberate? Miss Marple's eyes twinkled behind her spectacles. Carelessness is often a convenient excuse, Hastings. But let us consider the tray itself. 6 cups were prepared last night, 1 for each member of the household present at dinner. Yet only 5 were used. Whose cup was spared? I wonder. She set the cup down and moved to the sink, where a small, tarnished silver spoon lay among the drying cutlery. Her fingers paused over it, and she tilted her head, as if listening to a whisper only she could hear. "This spoon," she murmured, "is not like the others. The pattern is slightly different holder, perhaps, and it was found in the sink, separate from the tray's utensils." "Why?" Hastings, ever eager to follow her lead, leaned closer. "You think it's significant? It could just be a stray piece from another set." "Perhaps," Miss Marple said, her tone suggesting otherwise. "But in a household as orderly as Greystone Manor, a stray spoon is as out of place as a fox in a henhouse. We must ask ourselves, who used this spoon, and for what purpose?" Before Hastings could respond, the kitchen door creaked open and Mary, the housemaid, entered, her apron slightly askew and her face flushed with nervousness. She froze at the sight of Miss Marple, her hands twisting in her apron. "Oh, begging your pardon, ma'am. I didn't know anyone was here." Miss Marple turned, her smile gentle, but probing. "No need to apologize, Mary. I was just admiring the efficiency of this kitchen. Tell me, you prepared the tea tray last night, did you not?" Mary nodded, her eyes darting to the floor. "Yes, ma'am. I set out 6 cups, as Lady Evelyn requested. She liked everyone to have tea after dinner, even if they didn't always drink it." "And did everyone take a cup?" Miss Marple asked, her voice as soft as a breeze, but with an edge that made Mary stiffen. I think so, ma'am. I was in and out, clearing plates. I didn't watch closely, but I remember Mr. Charles didn't take his. He said he was going to the billiard room and didn't want tea." Miss Marple's needles, which she had retrieved from her bag, clicked softly as she resumed knitting. "And this spoon," she said, gesturing to the tarnished piece. "Do you recall who used it?" Mary's face paled, and she shook her head quickly. "No, ma'am. It must have been mixed in with the others. I didn't notice it until I was washing up." Miss Marple nodded, her expression unreadable. "Thank you, Mary. You've been most helpful." As the maid scurried out, Hastings turned to Miss Marple, his brow furrowed. "You don't think she's hiding something, do you?" She seemed awfully nervous. "People are often nervous when death visits a house, Hastings," Miss Marple replied, slipping the spoon into a small evidence bag she produced from her reticule. "But nervousness is not guilt. It is merely a symptom. We must look for the cause." They returned to the drawing room, where Inspector Japp was concluding his search of Charles's belongings. He emerged from the corridor, holding a small vial triumphantly aloft. "Found this in Mr. Langston's room," he announced, his voice carrying across the room to where the household sat, tense and watchful. A bottle of cyanide, tucked away in a cigar box. "Care to explain, Mr. Charles?" Charles leapt to his feet, his face ashen. "That's not mine. I've never seen it before in my life." Sir Reginald's voice thundered. "This is outrageous, Inspector. My son is no chemist. He wouldn't know cyanide from sugar syrup." Mrs. Winthrop clutched her husband's arm, her eyes wide with fear, while Dr. Winthrop's expression remained impassive, though his fingers tightened briefly on his medical bag. Beatrice Langley stifled a sob, and Mr. Caldwell's pen scratched furiously, as if trying to outrun the accusations. Miss Marple, seated once more in her high-backed chair, observed the scene with calm detachment. "Inspector," she said, her voice cutting through the chaos. "Might I see the vial?" Jap hesitated, then handed it to her. She examined it closely, turning it in her gloved hands. "A curious find," she said. "The label is pristine, yet the bottle is dusty, as if it has been hidden for some time, and the seal is unbroken. If this is indeed cyanide, it has not been used recently." Jap's confidence faltered, but he recovered quickly. "Hidden or not, it's damning evidence. Charles had motive, means, and opportunity." "Perhaps," Miss Marple said, handing the vial back. "But evidence, like a good cup of tea, must be fresh to be convincing. This vial feels staged, don't you think, Hastings?" Hastings nodded, catching her drift. "You mean someone planted it to point the finger at Charles?" Miss Marple's smile was enigmatic. "The human mind loves simplicity, Hastings. A vial of poison in a suspect's room is simple to simple. We must look for the contradiction, the detail that does not fit." As Jap continued to press Charles, Miss Marple's attention drifted to the tarnished spoon in her bag. Its presence nagged at her, a small but persistent anomaly in the orderly world of Greystone Manor. She glanced at the assembled suspects, her eyes lingering on Dr. Winthrop's medical bag and Beatrice's trembling hands. Somewhere in this tangle of alibis and objects, a truth was hiding, and Miss Marple was determined to find it piece by meticulous piece. Chapter 7. More lies surfaced. Late afternoon light cast long shadows across Greystone Manor's drawing room, where the air seemed to thicken with unspoken accusations. The household had reconvened at Inspector Jap's insistence, though the tension was palpable, as if each person feared their secrets might unravel under scrutiny. Miss Marple sat in her usual chair, her knitting needles moving with a rhythm that seemed to steady the room's nervous energy. Captain Hastings stood by the fireplace, his eyes flicking between the suspects, trying to discern the cracks in their carefully composed facades. Inspector Jap paced before the group, his notebook clutched like a weapon. The discovery of the cyanide vial in Charles Langston's room had galvanized him, but Miss Marple's quiet observation about its pristine condition had planted a seed of doubt. He now turned his attention to the broader household, determined to unearth more evidence. "We've established that Lady Evelyn was poisoned," he said, his voice sharp. "But what I want to know is who stood to gain from her death. Motives. Ladies and gentlemen, let's have them." Sir Reginald bristled, his face reddening. "This is preposterous, Inspector. My wife's death benefits no one. She was the heart of this family." Miss Marple's needles paused, and she looked up, her eyes gentle but piercing. "Forgive me, Sir Reginald, but the heart of a family often beats in time with its purse strings. Lady Evelyn's estate was considerable, was it not? And her will, has it been discussed?" The room stilled. Mr. Caldwell, the solicitor, cleared his throat, adjusting his spectacles. "Lady Evelyn's will was updated last month," he said, his tone cautious. "I was present when she signed it. The bulk of her estate was to be divided equally between Sir Reginald and Charles, with a significant bequest to Mrs. Winthrop, and a smaller sum for Miss Langley in recognition of her service." Mrs. Winthrop's head snapped up, her eyes narrowing. "A bequest? I knew nothing of this. Evelyn never mentioned it." Dr. Winthrop's hand tightened on his wife's arm, a gesture that did not escape Miss Marple's notice. Clara, dear, it's no surprise, he said smoothly. Evelyn was fond of you. She likely wanted to ensure your comfort. Miss Marple tilted her head, her voice soft but probing. And yet, Mrs. Winthrop, you seem surprised. Did you and your sister not discuss such matters? Sisters are often close in matters of the heart and the purse. Mrs. Winthrop's lips trembled, and for a moment, it seemed she might break. Evelyn and we had drifted apart, she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. There was a disagreement years ago over our father's estate. She felt I had taken more than my share. We reconciled, but it was never the same. The admission hung in the air, a crack in the family's polished veneer. Hastings, standing by the fireplace, felt a jolt of excitement. This was the sort of revelation Miss Marple thrived on, a glimpse into the hidden resentments that could fester into murder. Japp seized the moment, turning to Mrs. Winthrop. A disagreement, you say? Enough to make you resent her? Enough to slip something into her tea? Mrs. Winthrop gasped, her hand flying to her chest. How dare you? I loved my sister, despite our differences. I would never. Enough. Inspector, Dr. Winthrop interjected, his voice cold. My wife is grieving. You will not harass her with baseless accusations. Miss Marple's eyes flicked to Dr. Winthrop, noting the protective edge in his tone. Dr. Winthrop, your devotion to your wife is admirable, she said, but I am curious about your medical bag. You mentioned organizing it in the guest room. Did you, perhaps, notice anything missing when you returned to it after Lady Evelyn's death? Dr. Winthrop's face remained impassive, but his fingers twitched slightly. Nothing was missing, he said. My bag is always in order. I'm meticulous about such things. Miss Marple nodded, her expression unreadable. Of course, a doctor must be meticulous, much like a gardener, I suppose. Who notices when a single rose is out of place? Her gaze shifted to Beatrice Langley, who had been silent, her hands twisting her handkerchief into knots. Miss Langley, Miss Marple said, her voice gentle, you were so fond of Lady Evelyn's orchids. Did you ever help her with her tea? Perhaps stirring it with a particular spoon? Beatrice's eyes widened, and she shook her head vehemently. No, ma'am. I only tended the flowers. I never touched the tea tray. I wouldn't know how. Miss Marple smiled faintly, but her eyes were sharp. Of course, my dear. But you were in the conservatory, near the kitchen. Did you see anyone enter or leave around 8 o'clock? Beatrice hesitated, her gaze flickering to Charles, then away. I thought I saw someone near the kitchen door, but it was dark. I couldn't be sure. It might have been a servant. The room tensed, and Charles's face darkened. Are you accusing me, Beatrice? I told you. I was in the billiard room. I'm not accusing anyone, Beatrice cried, her voice breaking. I don't know what I saw. Miss Marple's needles resumed their steady rhythm, a counterpoint to the rising voices. No need for alarm, she said calmly. Memories can be slippery, especially in times of distress, but they often sharpen with time. As Japp moved to question Beatrice further, Miss Marple's attention returned to the tarnished spoon, now safely tucked in her reticule. Its presence gnawed at her, a small but persistent clue that refused to fit neatly into the puzzle. She glanced at Mr. Caldwell, who had been scribbling in his ledger throughout the exchange, his face a mask of neutrality. "Mr. Caldwell," she said, her voice cutting through the din, "you are a man of details. Did Lady Evelyn ever mention a particular attachment to that silver brooch she wore? It seems an odd choice for such an elegant woman." Caldwell's pen paused, and he looked up, his eyes guarded. "She did mention it once," he said slowly. "It was a family heirloom from her grandmother. She said it reminded her of her roots, though she rarely wore it. I found it sentimental for a woman of her sophistication." Miss Marple nodded, filing the information away. "Sentiment can be a powerful motive," she murmured, almost to herself. "As powerful as greed or fear." The room fell silent, the weight of her words settling over the group like a fog. Hastings, watching her, felt a familiar thrill. Miss Marple was circling closer to the truth, her mind sifting through the lies and half-truths like a prospector panning for gold. But the question remained, whose secret would unravel next? And how much deeper did the web of deceit extend? Chapter 8. The emotional turning point. The evening at Greystone Manor descended with a heavy stillness, the kind that follows a day of accusations and strange silences. The drawing room, now bathed in the soft glow of lamplight, seemed to close in around its occupants, as if the walls themselves were listening. Miss Marple sat in her high-backed chair, her knitting needles moving with their usual rhythmic calm, but her eyes were alert, scanning the faces of the household with the precision of a watchmaker. Captain Hastings stood near the window, the chill of the night seeping through the glass, mirroring the unease that gripped the room. The revelations of the day, Mrs. Winthrop's estrangement from her sister, the tarnished spoon, the questionable cyanide vial had left the household on edge, each suspect retreating into their own defenses. Inspector Japp, though still convinced of Charles Langston's guilt, had agreed to let Miss Marple pursue her inquiries, albeit with a grudging respect. Now, as the clock struck 8, the group gathered once more, summoned by Miss Marple's quiet but insistent request. "I have been thinking," Miss Marple began, her voice soft yet commanding attention, "about the nature of truth. It is like a rose, is it not? Beautiful, but guarded by thorns. To reach it, one must be careful, patient, and unafraid of a little pain. Tonight, I wish to discuss not what you did, but why you might have done it." The room stirred, a ripple of discomfort passing through the suspects. Sir Reginald's face darkened, his fingers gripping the armrest of his chair. Charles, still pale from Japp's accusations, stared at the floor, his jaw tight. Mrs. Winthrop sat rigidly, her hands clasped in her lap, while Dr. Winthrop's eyes flickered with a guarded intensity. Beatrice Langley's handkerchief was now a frayed mess, and Mr. Caldwell's pen, ever present, hovered over his ledger as if anticipating a revelation. Miss Marple's gaze settled on Mrs. Winthrop. "Mrs. Winthrop, you spoke of a disagreement with your sister over your father's estate. Such wounds, even old ones, can fester. Did you ever feel that Lady Evelyn held a grudge against you?" Mrs. Winthrop's lips parted, but no sound came at first. Her eyes, red-rimmed from grief or guilt, darted to her husband before returning to Miss Marple. "Evelyn was distant," she said, her voice trembling. "She never forgave me for taking what she thought was her share. I tried to make amends, but she kept me at arm's length. When she included me in her will, I was shocked. I thought she hated me. The admission hung in the air, raw and unguarded. Dr. Winthrop squeezed his wife's hand, his face a mask of concern, but Miss Marple noted the slight tightening of his jaw, the way his eyes avoided hers. "And you, Dr. Winthrop," she said, her tone gentle but unyielding. "Did you ever discuss this rift with Lady Evelyn? As her brother-in-law, you must have seen its effect on your wife." Dr. Winthrop's response was measured, almost too careful. "Evelyn and I spoke little of personal matters. My concern was for Clara's well-being. I urged her to let the past go, but family quarrels are stubborn things." Miss Marple nodded, her needles clicking softly. "Indeed, stubborn and sometimes dangerous." Her gaze shifted to Beatrice, whose hands trembled visibly. "Miss Langley, you were close to Lady Evelyn, were you not? As her confidant, did she ever speak of her fears, of anyone who might wish her harm?" Beatrice's eyes filled with tears, and for a moment it seemed she might collapse under the weight of the question. She was worried, she whispered, her voice breaking. "Not about anyone specific, but about the estate. She said there were secrets, things she couldn't tell even me. She was afraid of what might happen if they came out." The room froze, the word secrets echoing like a gunshot. Sir Reginald's face paled, and Charles's head snapped up, his eyes wide with alarm. Mr. Caldwell's pen scratched furiously, and Mrs. Winthrop let out a soft sob, quickly stifled by her husband's hand. Miss Marple leaned forward, her voice barely above a whisper. "Secrets, Miss Langley, what kind of secrets?" Beatrice shook her head, tears spilling down her cheeks. "I don't know. She wouldn't say. She said the brooch was important, that it held a truth no one else knew. I didn't understand. And now she's gone." Her voice cracked, and she buried her face in her handkerchief, her shoulders shaking with sobs. The room erupted in murmurs, but Miss Marple raised a hand, silencing them. "Thank you, Miss Langley. Your honesty is a light in this dark affair." Her eyes swept over the group, lingering on each face as if measuring the weight of their guilt. Secrets are heavy burdens. They drive people to desperate acts of love, acts of fear, or acts of vengeance. Hastings, watching from the window, felt a chill that had nothing to do with the night air. Beatrice's outburst had shifted, something in the room, exposing a raw nerve that no one could ignore. He glanced at Miss Marple, whose calm exterior belied the intensity of her focus. She was closing in, he knew, her mind weaving the threads of motive and opportunity into a pattern only she could see. "Inspector Japp," Miss Marple said, turning to the policeman, who had been watching the exchange with growing impatience. "I wonder if you might ask the butler about the silverware used for the tea tray, specifically, whether any spoons were missing or replaced after dinner." Japp frowned, clearly puzzled, but nodded. "I'll look into it, Miss Marple. But I still say Charles is our man. That vial in his room is a distraction." Miss Marple interjected, her voice firm, a clever one. "Perhaps, but not the truth. The truth lies in the details: the spoon, the brooch, the secrets Lady Evelyn carried. We are close, Inspector, but we must be patient." As Japp left to summon the butler, Miss Marple's gaze returned to the tarnished spoon in her reticule, its presence a silent challenge. Beatrice's words about the brooch echoed in her mind, a clue that felt tantalizingly close to the heart of the mystery. Someone in this room knew more than they were saying, and Miss Marple was determined to uncover it, even if it meant peeling back layers of lies to reveal the painful truth beneath. Chapter 9. The trapped atmosphere in Greystone Manor's drawing room had grown taut as a bowstring. The weight of Beatrice Langley's tearful revelation about Lady Evelyn's secrets, hanging over the household like a storm cloud. The lamps cast flickering shadows on the walls, and the air was thick with suspicion, each glance between the suspects laced with unspoken accusations. Miss Marple sat in her high-backed chair, her knitting needles moving with their usual steady rhythm, but her eyes were sharp, darting from face to face as if reading a script only she could decipher. Captain Hastings stood by the fireplace, his hands clasped behind his back, watching her with a mix of admiration and anticipation. He knew this was the moment she would begin to tighten the net. Miss Marple had requested the household gather once more, this time with a purpose she had only hinted at to Hastings. Tonight, she had whispered to him earlier, "We shall apply a little pressure, Hastings, and see who bends." Now, as the clock struck 9, she rose, her small figure commanding the room's attention with an authority that belied her unassuming appearance. "My friends," she began, her voice soft but clear, carrying the weight of inevitability, "we have danced around the truth long enough. Lady Evelyn's death was no accident, nor was it a crime of impulse. It was planned, with care and cunning, and the key to it lies not in what was done, but in what was meant to be seen. I propose a little experiment to clarify matters." The room stirred, a ripple of unease passing through the suspects. Sir Reginald's brow furrowed, his fingers gripping the armrests of his chair. Charles Langston's eyes narrowed, his earlier defiance tempered by a flicker of fear. Mrs. Winthrop clutched her husband's arm, her face pale, while Dr. Winthrop's expression remained impassive, though his fingers twitched slightly on his medical bag. Beatrice Langley's hands trembled, her handkerchief now a tattered ruin, and Mr. Caldwell's pen hovered over his ledger, as if awaiting a revelation he dreaded to record. Miss Marple reached into her reticule and produced the tarnished silver spoon, holding it up for all to see. "This spoon," she said, "was found in the kitchen sink, apart from the tea tray's utensils. Its pattern is older, distinct from the set used at dinner. I have learned from the butler that it was not part of the tray prepared for Lady Evelyn's tea. Yet, it was used that night. By whom, and for what purpose?" The question hung in the air, sharp and accusing. Inspector Japp, standing near the door, raised an eyebrow, clearly intrigued despite his skepticism. Hastings, watching the suspects, noted their reactions. Sir Reginald's frown deepened. Charles shifted uncomfortably, and Mrs. Winthrop's breath caught, her eyes fixed on the spoon as if it were a venomous snake. Miss Marple continued, her voice steady, "Let us reconstruct the evening. At 8 o'clock, the tea tray was prepared with 6 cups, one for each of you. Charles, you declined yours, leaving 5. Lady Evelyn drank from hers, and it contained cyanide. But the poison was not in the teapot, for no one else was affected. It was in her cup alone. Someone added it, and I believe this spoon was used to stir it in quietly, discreetly. In a moment when no one was watching, Dr. Winthrop's voice cut through the silence, calm but edged with irritation. This is speculation, Miss Marple. A spoon proves nothing. Anyone could have picked it up by mistake. Indeed, Miss Marple said, her smile faint but unwavering. But mistakes are revealing. Dr. Winthrop, let us consider another detail. The brooch. Lady Evelyn wore it that evening. A tarnished silver piece with a sapphire, an heirloom she valued for its sentiment. Yet, it was found 10 feet from her body, its clasp intact. Why was it there? Was it torn off in a struggle, or placed there to tell us something? Beatrice Langley let out a soft gasp, her eyes wide. She said it held a truth, she whispered, almost to herself. She told me it was important. Miss Marple's gaze softened, but her focus remained sharp. Yes, Miss Langley, a truth. Perhaps a truth someone wished to hide or to reveal. Let us test this. I have asked Inspector Japp to bring the brooch here tonight. I propose we examine it together. Japp stepped forward, producing a small evidence bag containing the brooch. He handed it to Miss Marple, who held it up to the light. Its sapphire, catching the lamplight in a dull, mournful gleam. This brooch, she said, is not merely an ornament, it is a message. Inspector, would you confirm that the clasp is indeed intact? Japp nodded, his voice gruff. It is. No signs of damage. Miss Marple turned the brooch over, her fingers tracing its intricate design. Then it was not torn off. It was removed, deliberately, and placed where it would be found. I believe Lady Evelyn herself removed it, in her final moments, to point us to her killer. The room erupted in murmurs, shock and disbelief mingling with fear. Sir Reginald's voice rose above the din. This is absurd. Evelyn was poisoned. She had no time to leave messages. Miss Marple's eyes met his, calm but unyielding. On the contrary, Sir Reginald, cyanide acts quickly, but not instantly. In those fleeting moments, a determined woman might leave a clue, and Lady Evelyn was determined. Was she not? She turned to the group, her voice rising slightly, a rare note of command. I ask you now, who among you knew the significance of this brooch? Who knew what truth it held? Speak, or I shall be forced to draw my own conclusions. The silence was deafening, broken only by a choked sob from Mrs. Winthrop. She rose, her hands trembling, her face a mask of anguish. It was our grandmother's, she said, her voice breaking. Evelyn said it was a reminder of a promise to protect the family. But she said someone had betrayed that promise. She wouldn't tell me who. The confession sent a shockwave through the room. Charles's face drained of color, and Dr. Winthrop's hand tightened on his wife's arm, his eyes flashing with something close to panic. Mr. Caldwell's pen froze, and Beatrice's tears fell silently, her gaze fixed on the floor. Miss Marple nodded, her expression grave. Thank you, Mrs. Winthrop. You have given us a piece of the truth, but there is more to uncover. The spoon, the brooch, the secrets, they are all connected. And I believe one of you knows how. She paused, her eyes sweeping the room, locking onto each suspect in turn. Tomorrow we shall gather again, and I shall lay out the truth in full. Until then, I suggest you reflect on your actions and your consciences. As the household dispersed, their faces edged with fear and suspicion. Hastings leaned toward Miss Marple, his voice low. "You're closing in, aren't you? You know who did it." Miss Marple's smile was enigmatic. "I have a theory, Hastings. But a theory is like a half-bloomed rose, it needs time to open fully. Tomorrow, we shall see the truth in all its colors." Chapter 10. The reveal. Morning sun poured through the tall windows of Greystone Manor's drawing room, casting a golden glow that did little to dispel the chill of anticipation. The household had gathered once more, their faces a mix of dread and resignation, as if they knew the hour of truth had arrived. Miss Marple sat in her high-backed chair, her knitting needles at rest in her lap, her eyes bright and unyielding behind her spectacles. Captain Hastings stood by the fireplace, his heart pounding with the certainty that Miss Marple was about to unveil the solution to Lady Evelyn's murder. Inspector Japp, notebook in hand, stood near the door, his expression a blend of skepticism and grudging respect. Miss Marple rose, her small figure commanding the room with a quiet authority. "My friends," she began, her voice clear and measured, "we have come to the heart of this sad affair. Lady Evelyn's death was no accident, nor was it a crime of passion. It was a calculated act, woven with care and cunning, and its threads are now clear to me. Let us unravel them together." The suspects sat in a tense semicircle. Sir Reginald, his face pale and drawn; Charles, his defiance replaced by a nervous fidgeting; Mrs. Winthrop, her eyes red-rimmed and fearful; Dr. Winthrop, his jaw tight, his medical bag at his feet; Beatrice Langley, clutching her tattered handkerchief; and Mr. Caldwell, his ledger closed, his pen still for the first time. Miss Marple held up the tarnished silver spoon, its dull surface catching the light. "This spoon," she said, "was the first clue that pointed to the truth. It was not part of the tea tray set, yet it was found in the kitchen sink, used on the night of the murder. It was used to stir cyanide into Lady Evelyn's tea, not in the teapot, but in her cup alone, ensuring only she would be poisoned." She turned to the brooch, now resting on a small table beside her. "And this brooch, removed from Lady Evelyn's dress and placed 10 feet away, was her final act, a message to us. She knew her killer, and in her last moments, she pointed to them." The room was silent, the air thick with tension. Miss Marple's gaze swept over the group, lingering on each face. "Let us begin with the evening of the murder. At 8 o'clock, the tea tray was prepared with 6 cups. Charles declined his, leaving 5. Lady Evelyn drank from hers, and it contained cyanide. The poison was added after the tray was brought to the dining room by someone who had access to her cup a moment alone." She turned to Charles, whose face had gone ashen. "Mr. Charles, you were the obvious suspect. Your argument with your mother, the cyanide vial found in your room, these were compelling, but too convenient. The vial was dusty, its seal unbroken. It was placed there to incriminate you, a distraction to draw attention from the true killer." Charles exhaled, relief mingling with fear. "Then who?" he demanded, his voice hoarse. Miss Marple's eyes moved to Dr. Winthrop, whose composure faltered for the first time. "Dr. Winthrop," she said, "you were in the kitchen at 8, fetching water, you said. But the dining room decanters were full. You had no need to go to the kitchen unless it was to tamper with the tea tray. You are a doctor, familiar with poisons, and your medical bag, so carefully organized, could easily conceal a small quantity of cyanide. Dr. Winthrop's face darkened, but he remained silent, his hands gripping his bag. Mrs. Winthrop gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Harold, tell her it's not true. Miss Marple continued, undeterred. But the spoon tells a different story. It was not from the tray, but from an older set, kept in a drawer in the dining room. Only someone familiar with the household's routines would know it was there, and the brooch Lady Evelyn's message points to a motive deeper than money. She turned to Mrs. Winthrop, her voice softening. Mrs. Winthrop, you spoke of a rift with your sister, a disagreement over your father's estate. But there was more, was there not? Lady Evelyn told Beatrice the brooch held a truth, a promise betrayed. That promise was between you and your sister, a vow to protect a family secret, a secret about your husband. Mrs. Winthrop's face crumpled, tears streaming down her cheeks. No, she whispered. Please, don't. Miss Marple's expression was one of pity, but her voice was firm. The secret was Dr. Winthrop's past. Lady Evelyn discovered that he had been struck off the medical register years ago for unethical practices prescribing dangerous substances to patients for profit. She threatened to expose him, to protect you and the family's reputation. But Dr. Winthrop could not allow that. He saw her as a threat, not just to his career, but to his control over you. Dr. Winthrop rose, his face a mask of fury. This is outrageous. You have no proof. Miss Marple held up the spoon, her voice cutting through his protest. The spoon, Dr. Winthrop, was your mistake. You used it to stir the cyanide, thinking it would blend with the tray's utensils. But it was from the old set, kept in the dining room drawer, a drawer you knew about from your many visits to Greystone. And the brooch Lady Evelyn removed it as she fell, placing it near the rose garden's edge, pointing to you. The sapphire in it matched the one in your cufflinks, a gift from your wife. A symbol of your bond. She knew you would recognize it. Mrs. Winthrop sobbed, her voice breaking. Harold, is it true? Did you kill her? Dr. Winthrop's composure shattered, his shoulders slumping. I had no choice, he whispered, his voice barely audible. Evelyn was going to ruin us. She found the old records. Threatened to tell everyone. I couldn't let her destroy Clara's life, our life. The room erupted in gasps and murmurs. Inspector Japp stepped forward, his face grim. Dr. Harold Winthrop, you're under arrest for the murder of Lady Evelyn Langston. As Japp led Dr. Winthrop away, Mrs. Winthrop collapsed into her chair, her sobs echoing in the stunned silence. Sir Reginald and Charles sat frozen, their faces etched with shock. Beatrice's tears fell silently, and Mr. Caldwell closed his ledger, his expression one of quiet resignation. Miss Marple folded her knitting, her eyes somber. The truth is a heavy burden, she said softly, but it is better borne than hidden. Hastings, watching her, felt a surge of awe. She had seen through the lies, the red herrings, the carefully laid traps, and brought the truth to light with nothing but her keen observation and understanding of human nature. The case was solved, but the cost of the truth hung heavy in the air. Chapter 11. The reflection-they drawing room at Greystone Manor was quiet now, the storm of revelations having passed, leaving only the debris of broken trust and shattered illusions. The lamps burned low, casting a soft, almost mournful light over the room where the remaining members of the household sat in stunned silence. Dr. Winthrop had been taken away by Inspector Japp, his confession still echoing in their minds like the tolling of a funeral bell. Miss Marple remained in her high-backed chair, her knitting needles tucked away in her reticule, her hands folded neatly in her lap. Captain Hastings stood by the window, gazing out at the darkened rose garden where the memory of Lady Evelyn's death lingered like a shadow. Sir Reginald was the first to break the silence, his voice heavy with grief. "How could we not have seen it?" he murmured, his eyes fixed on the empty space where his wife had once sat. Harold. He was family. How could he do this to Evelyn? Miss Marple's gaze softened, her voice gentle, but firm. The human heart, Sir Reginald, is a complex thing. It can love and betray in the same breath. Dr. Winthrop believed he was protecting his wife, his life, his secrets. But in doing so, he destroyed the very thing he sought to preserve. Mrs. Winthrop, her face pale and streaked with tears, looked up, her voice trembling. "I should have known," she whispered. "Evelyn tried to warn me, didn't she? That brooch, she wore it to remind me of our promise, our bond. And I ignored her." Miss Marple leaned forward slightly, her eyes kind but unflinching. "Do not blame yourself, Mrs. Winthrop. Your sister's love for you was clear, even in her final act. She placed the brooch to point to her killer, not to accuse you, but to protect you from the truth she knew would hurt you." Charles, who had been silent, his head bowed, looked up, his eyes red but resolute. "I was a fool," he said. "I thought Mother was against me, always harping on about my investments. But she was trying to protect the family, wasn't she? From him." Miss Marple nodded, her expression grave. Lady Evelyn was a woman of great strength and perception. She saw the danger in Dr. Winthrop's past, and she sought to shield you all. Her brooch was her final message, a testament to her love and her resolve. Beatrice Langley, her handkerchief now a sodden rag, spoke softly, her voice barely audible. "She was so kind to me. I wish I'd understood what she meant about the brooch. I could have helped her." "You did help her, Miss Langley," Miss Marple said gently. "Your honesty, your memory of her words, helped us uncover the truth. You honored her in the end." Mr. Caldwell, who had been uncharacteristically quiet, closed his ledger with a soft thud. "I suppose I should have seen it too," he said, his voice tinged with regret. "Evelyn was meticulous about her affairs. She hinted at concerns about certain discrepancies in the estate. But I thought it was just her usual caution." Miss Marple's eyes flickered to him, a faint smile playing on her lips. "Caution is a virtue, Mr. Caldwell, but it cannot always prevent tragedy. Lady Evelyn's caution gave us the clues we needed: the spoon, the brooch, the secrets she guarded. They were her legacy to us." That double quotes Hastings, listening to her words, felt a familiar awe. Miss Marple's ability to see the truth in the smallest details, to understand the complexities of human nature, was nothing short of remarkable. He turned to her, his voice low. "You knew from the start, didn't you? that it wasn't Charles, that it was something deeper. Miss Marple's smile was enigmatic, her eyes twinkling behind her spectacles. Not from the start, Hastings, but the human mind leaves patterns, like footprints in a garden. One need only look closely to see where they lead. Dr. Winthrop's pattern was one of control over his wife, his reputation, his secrets. The spoon was his misstep. The brooch his undoing. She rose, her small figure a beacon of calm amidst the storm of emotions. "I shall leave you now," she said, addressing the room. Greystone Manor has suffered a great loss, but it is a house of strength. You will rebuild in time, and Lady Evelyn's memory will guide you. Sir Reginald stood, his voice thick with gratitude. "Miss Marple, we owe you a debt we can never repay. You've brought us the truth, painful though it is." Miss Marple inclined her head, her expression humble, but resolute. "The truth is its own reward, Sir Reginald. I only hope it brings you peace." As she gathered her reticule and prepared to leave, Hastings followed her to the door, his mind still reeling from the day's events. "What now, Miss Marple?" he asked, his voice tinged with curiosity. "Back to St. Mary Mead?" She paused, her hand on the doorknob, and turned to him with a faint smile. "For now, Hastings. But the world is full of mysteries, and I suspect my little gray cells will not rest for long." With that, she stepped into the night, her figure disappearing into the shadows of the gravel drive. Hastings watched her go, a sense of quiet wonder settling over him. The case was closed, the truth revealed. But Miss Marple's philosophy that the smallest details held the greatest truths would linger in his mind, a lesson as enduring as the roses in Greystone's garden. Chapter 12. The aftermath. Morning after Dr. Winthrop's rest dawned gray and heavy over Greystone Manor, the sky cloaked in clouds that mirrored the somber mood within. The drawing room, once a stage for tension and revelation, now felt hollow, its occupants moving through the motions of grief and recovery like actors in a play without a script. The absence of Lady Evelyn and the betrayal of Dr. Winthrop had left a wound in the household that would not soon heal. Miss Marple, however, remained, her presence a quiet anchor in the storm. She sat in her familiar chair, her knitting needles clicking softly, her eyes observing the subtle shifts in the family's dynamics. Captain Hastings stood by the window, watching the drizzle coat the rose garden in a fine mist. He felt a strange mix of relief and unease. The case was solved, the murderer apprehended. But the cost had been high. He turned to Miss Marple, who was calmly sipping a cup of tea brought by the housemaid. "Mary, it's over, isn't it?" he said, his voice tinged with uncertainty. "But it doesn't feel finished. Not for them." Miss Marple set her cup down, her expression thoughtful. "A mystery solved is not always a story ended, Hastings. The truth brings clarity, but it also leaves scars. The Langston family must now face those scars and find a way to mend them." The door opened, and Sir Reginald entered, his face haggard, but resolute. He carried a small, leather-bound box, which he placed on the table before Miss Marple. "I found this in Evelyn's study," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "It was locked away in her desk, with a note addressed to you. I thought you should see it." Miss Marple's eyes flickered with interest as she opened the box. Inside was a delicate gold locket, its surface engraved with a rose motif that echoed the garden outside. Beside it lay a folded piece of paper, its edges worn but intact. She unfolded it carefully, her eyes scanning the elegant handwriting. "Read it aloud, if you please," Sir Reginald said, his voice barely above a whisper. Miss Marple nodded and began to read, her voice steady and clear. "My dear Miss Marple, if you are reading this, I am gone, and you have uncovered the truth I could not speak. The brooch was my signal, a plea to protect my family from a danger I feared, but could not name. I trust your wisdom to see what I could not. Forgive me for my silence, and guard those I love. Yours, Evelyn Langston." The room fell silent, the weight of Lady Evelyn's words settling over them like a shroud. Sir Reginald's eyes glistened, and he turned away, his shoulders shaking. Charles, who had entered quietly behind his father, clenched his fists, his face a mix of guilt and sorrow. "She knew," he said hoarsely. "She knew something was wrong, and I didn't listen." Miss Marple closed the locket with a soft click, her expression somber. "Lady Evelyn was a woman of great intuition," she said. "She sensed a darkness in her household, and she placed her trust in the truth to bring it to light. You must not blame yourself, Mr. Charles. She wished to protect you, not to burden you." Mrs. Winthrop entered, supported by Beatrice, who had taken it upon herself to comfort her. Her face was pale, her eyes hollow, but she managed a nod to Miss Marple. I wanted to thank you," she said, her voice trembling, "for finding the truth. I can't forgive Harold, not yet, but I needed to know why. For Evelyn's sake." Miss Marple inclined her head, her eyes kind. "The truth is a bitter medicine, Mrs. Winthrop, but it is the first step toward healing. Your sister loved you, and her final act was to ensure you were free of the shadow her killer cast." Beatrice, her voice soft but steady, added, "Lady Evelyn was like a mother to me. I'll never forget her kindness. I only wish I could have done more." "You did enough, Miss Langley," Miss Marple said gently. "Your honesty helped us see the path to the truth. That is no small thing." Mr. Caldwell, who had been hovering near the door, stepped forward, his ledger tucked under his arm. "I've prepared the necessary documents to execute Lady Evelyn's will," he said, his tone formal, but tinged with regret. "Her wishes will be honored, though it feels hollow. After all this." Miss Marple's gaze met his, a faint smile touching her lips. "Hollow, perhaps, Mr. Caldwell, but necessary. Lady Evelyn's legacy is not just in her wealth, but in the love she bore for her family. That must be preserved." As the household began to disperse, each member retreating to process their grief, Hastings turned to Miss Marple, his voice low. "You gave them closure, Miss Marple. But what about you? Don't you ever feel the weight of it all?" Miss Marple's eyes twinkled, though there was a hint of weariness in them. "The weight, Hastings, is part of the work. To see the truth is a privilege, but it comes with a cost. I carry it lightly, for I know it serves a purpose. Now, come, let us take a turn in the rose garden before we depart. It is a place of beauty, even in sorrow." They stepped outside, the drizzle cool against their faces, and walked slowly through the garden where Lady Evelyn had met her end. The roses, damp and vibrant, seemed to stand as sentinels, guarding the memory of a woman who had fought to protect her family. Miss Marple paused by the spot where the brooch had been found, her eyes distant but serene. "Every mystery has its roses, Hastings," she said softly, "and every rose has its thorns. We must learn to cherish both." Hastings nodded, his heart full of respect for the unassuming woman who had unraveled the darkest of secrets. With nothing but her keen mind and quiet compassion, the case of the Tarnished Brooch was closed, but its echoes would linger, a reminder of the delicate balance between truth and love. Chapter 13. The unseen thread's drizzle had ceased, and a pale sun broke through the clouds, casting a tentative light over Greystone Manor's rose garden. The air was fresh, carrying the scent of wet earth and blooming roses, a quiet contrast to the turmoil that had gripped the household. Miss Marple walked slowly along the gravel path, her hands clasped behind her back, her eyes scanning the garden with the same meticulous care she had applied to the case. Captain Hastings followed, his mind still turning over the revelations of the previous day, marveling at how Miss Marple had woven together the threads of evidence to expose Dr. Winthrop's guilt. They had lingered at the manor at Sir Reginald's request, who had asked Miss Marple to stay one more day to help the family navigate the aftermath of the tragedy. Now, as they paused near the spot where Lady Evelyn's body had been found, Miss Marple's expression grew pensive. "There is always more to a story, Hastings," she said, her voice soft but deliberate. "Even when the murderer is caught, there are threads that remain unseen, waiting to be understood." Hastings frowned, puzzled. "More threads? But Dr. Winthrop confessed. The case is solved, isn't it?" Miss Marple's lips curved in a faint smile. "The murder is solved, yes, but the human heart is never so tidy. There are questions that linger not about the crime, but about the people it touched. Come, let us return to the house. I have one final conversation to arrange." Back in the drawing room, the atmosphere was subdued, but less oppressive than before. The family had begun to grapple with their grief, and a fragile sense of unity was emerging. Sir Reginald sat by the fire, his face weary, but composed, while Charles stood nearby, his usual defiance softened by a newfound resolve. Mrs. Winthrop, still pale and fragile, sat with Beatrice, who had become her quiet shadow, offering comfort in small gestures. Mr. Caldwell was absent, attending to the legalities of Lady Evelyn's will in town. Miss Marple took her seat, her presence drawing the room's attention like a magnet. "I have asked you to gather once more," she said, her voice calm but authoritative, "because there is one matter left to address. Lady Evelyn's death was a tragedy, but it was also a catalyst. It has revealed truths that must now be faced, not just about her killer, but about each of you." Sir Reginald looked up, his eyes searching hers. "What more is there, Miss Marple? Harold's guilt is clear. What else could there be?" Miss Marple's gaze was steady. "There is the matter of trust, Sir Reginald. Lady Evelyn's letter spoke of a promise betrayed, but it was not only Dr. Winthrop who broke faith. Each of you, in your own way, kept secrets from her, secrets that strained the bonds of this family." Charles shifted uncomfortably, his voice low. "You mean my investments, don't you? I know I disappointed her, but I never meant to hurt her." Miss Marple nodded, her expression kind but unflinching. "Your mother worried for you, Mr. Charles, not because she doubted your heart, but because she feared you were lost to recklessness. She wanted to guide you, but you kept her at a distance. That distance was a wound to her." Charles's shoulders sagged, and he nodded, his eyes glistening. "I see that now. I wish I'd listened to her." Miss Marple turned to Mrs. Winthrop, whose hands trembled in her lap. "And you, Mrs. Winthrop, carried the weight of an old quarrel. Your estrangement from your sister was not just about money, but about pride. You both held fast to your grievances, and that silence allowed Dr. Winthrop's secrets to fester." Mrs. Winthrop's tears fell silently, and she nodded, her voice barely audible. "I should have spoken to her. I should have mended things." Beatrice, sitting beside her, reached out, her hand resting gently on Mrs. Winthrop's. "You loved her," she said softly. "She knew that, even if you didn't say it." Miss Marple's eyes softened as she looked at Beatrice. "And you, Miss Langley, carried a burden of loyalty. You saw Lady Evelyn's fear, her hints of danger, but you felt bound by your place to stay silent. Your courage in speaking out, even late, was what helped us find the truth." Beatrice's lips trembled, but she managed a small nod. "I only wish I'd been braver sooner." Miss Marple's gaze returned to Sir Reginald, who sat rigid, his face etched with pain. "And you, Sir Reginald, bore the heaviest burden of all. You knew of your wife's concerns, her suspicions about Dr. Winthrop, but you chose to trust him, to preserve the family's harmony. That trust, though well-intentioned, blinded you to the danger." Sir Reginald's voice broke as he spoke. "I failed her. I thought I was protecting her, protecting us all, but I let that monster into our home." Miss Marple leaned forward, her voice gentle but firm. "You did not fail her, Sir Reginald. You loved her, and she loved you. Her final act of brooch was not just a clue to her killer, but a testament to her faith in you. In this family, you must honor that by rebuilding what has been broken." The room was silent, the weight of her words settling over them like a balm. Hastings, watching from the sidelines, felt a lump in his throat. Miss Marple had not only solved the murder, but had laid bare the fractures in the family, urging them to heal. It was a gift as profound as her solution to the crime. She rose, her reticule in hand, her expression serene. "My work here is done," she said. "The unseen threads, love, trust, regret are yours to weave now. Let them guide you to a stronger future." As she moved toward the door, Sir Reginald stood, his voice thick with gratitude. "Miss Marple, you've given us more than justice. You've given us a chance to start again. We won't forget that." Miss Marple inclined her head, her smile warm. "Then I am content. Farewell, Sir Reginald, and all of you. May Greystone Manor find peace." Hastings followed her out, his heart full of admiration. As they stepped into the garden, the sun broke through the clouds, casting a golden glow over the roses. "You've done it again, Miss Marple," he said, his voice tinged with awe. "You've not only caught a killer, but mended a family." Miss Marple's eyes twinkled as she looked out at the garden. "The heart of a mystery, Hastings, is not just in the crime, but in the people it touches. To solve one is to understand the other. Now, let us go. St. Mary Mead awaits, and I have roses of my own to tend. Chapter 14. The final close afternoon light filtered through the windows of Greystone Manor, casting a soft glow over the drawing room, where Miss Marple had gathered the household one last time. The air was less heavy now, as if the truth of Dr. Winthrop's guilt had lifted a veil, allowing the family to breathe, if only tentatively. Yet, there was a sense of unfinished business, a lingering question that hung unspoken among them. Miss Marple, seated in her familiar high-backed chair, her reticule at her side, seemed to sense it too. Her eyes, sharp and perceptive, moved over the group with a quiet intensity, as if she were tying up the final threads of the mystery. Captain Hastings stood by the fireplace, his hands clasped behind his back, watching her with a mix of curiosity and anticipation. He had thought the case closed with Dr. Winthrop's confession, but Miss Marple's insistence on this final meeting suggested there was more to uncover, not about the murder itself, but about the ripples it had left behind. Sir Reginald, Charles, Mrs. Winthrop, and Beatrice Langley sat in their usual places, their faces a mix of exhaustion and cautious hope. Mr. Caldwell had returned from town and stood near the door, his ledger tucked under his arm, his expression one of quiet attentiveness. Inspector Jupp was absent, busy finalizing the paperwork for Dr. Winthrop's arrest, leaving Miss Marple to guide the household through this last chapter. "My dear friends," Miss Marple began, her voice soft but commanding, "we have faced a great tragedy together, and the truth of Lady Evelyn's death has been revealed. But there are still small clues, fragments of the story, that deserve our attention. They are not about guilt, but about understanding, about ensuring that her legacy is not lost in sorrow." Sir Reginald leaned forward, his brow furrowed. "What more is there, Miss Marple? Harold's confession was clear. What else could there be to know?" Miss Marple's lips curved in a gentle smile. "The truth is like a rose garden, Sir Reginald. The blooms are beautiful, but the roots run deep, and they must be tended. Lady Evelyn left us more than a clue to her killer. She left us a map to her heart. Let us examine one final detail." She reached into her reticule and produced the gold locket from Lady Evelyn's box, its rose motif gleaming faintly in the light. This locket, found with her letter, was not mentioned in her will, nor was it among her everyday jewelry, yet she kept it locked away, with a note addressed to me. Why? The room stirred, curiosity piqued. Charles's eyes narrowed, and he spoke, his voice hesitant. "Mother never wore that locket. I thought it was just another trinket, something sentimental." Miss Marple opened the locket, revealing a small, faded photograph inside a young Evelyn and Clara, arm in arm, smiling in a garden much like the one outside. "This," she said, holding it up, "is a reminder of a bond that endured, despite years of strain. Lady Evelyn kept it close, not as a trinket, but as a promise to her sister, a promise to protect, even at great cost." Mrs. Winthrop's eyes filled with tears, and she reached out, her fingers trembling as she took the locket. "We were so close once," she whispered. "Before the quarrel, before everything, she kept this for me." Miss Marple nodded, her expression tender. "She did, Mrs. Winthrop, and I believe she wanted you to have it, not as a reminder of pain, but of love. The brooch was her message to us about her killer. But this locket was her message to you, a plea to heal, to rebuild. Beatrice, sitting beside Mrs. Winthrop, touched her arm gently. She loved you, Clara. Even when you fought, she never stopped. Miss Marple's gaze shifted to Charles, who sat with his head bowed. And you, Mr. Charles, have a clue of your own to consider. Your mother's concerns about your investments were not mere criticism. She had asked Mr. Caldwell to review your financial ventures, had she not? Mr. Caldwell nodded, stepping forward. She did, Miss Marple. Lady Evelyn was worried about certain risky partnerships Charles had entered. She wanted to protect the estate, to ensure its stability for the family. Charles looked up, his face a mix of surprise and guilt. She was trying to help me. I thought she was just controlling. Miss Marple's eyes softened. She was guiding you in her way. Her love was strict, but it was love nonetheless. You must honor it by learning from her caution, by building a future she would be proud of. Sir Reginald's voice was hoarse as he spoke. And me, Miss Marple. What clue did she leave for me? Miss Marple's gaze met his, steady and compassionate. For you, Sir Reginald, she left the garden itself. The roses were her pride, her sanctuary. And she tended them as she tended this family, with care, with patience, with strength. She trusted you to carry on that care, to keep this house a home. Sir Reginald's eyes glistened, and he nodded, his voice barely audible. I'll try, Miss Marple, for her. Miss Marple rose, her reticule in hand, her expression serene. The final clues are not objects, but lessons. Lady Evelyn's life was a tapestry of love and duty, and her death, though tragic, has woven you closer together. Cherish that, and let it guide you forward. Hastings, watching from the sidelines, felt a swell of admiration. Miss Marple had not only solved the murder, but had illuminated the human connections that lay at its heart, offering the family a path to healing. He stepped forward, his voice low. You've given them more than justice, Miss Marple. You've given them hope. Miss Marple's eyes twinkled as she adjusted her shawl. Hope, Hastings, is the greatest clue of all. It is what keeps us tending the garden, even after the storm. Now, come, our train awaits, and St. Mary Mead calls. As they left the drawing room, the family remained, their faces softened by the promise of a new beginning. The locket, the garden, the unspoken love, they were the final clues, the threads that would bind Greystone Manor together, long after the shadow of murder had faded. Chapter 15. The departure at the train station at the edge of the village was a modest affair. Its platform, dusted with the first fallen leaves of autumn, carried on a brisk wind that hinted at the changing season. Miss Marple stood beside Captain Hastings, her small suitcase at her feet, her shawl neatly draped over her shoulders. The events at Greystone Manor had left their mark, but her demeanor was as composed as ever, her eyes bright with the quiet satisfaction of a case well solved. Hastings, holding his own valise, glanced at her, a mix of admiration and wistfulness. In his expression, the mystery of Lady Evelyn's murder had been unraveled, the family given a chance to heal. But he knew this departure marked the end of another chapter in their shared adventures. The platform was nearly empty, save for a porter loading luggage onto the waiting train and a few villagers bidding farewell. To departing travelers. The whistle of the engine sounded in the distance, a low, mournful note that seemed to echo the bittersweet mood of the moment. Miss Marple turned to Hastings, her smile gentle, but knowing. "You are thoughtful, Hastings," she said, her voice soft but clear. "Is it the case that occupies you, or something else?" Hastings chuckled, shaking his head. "You always see through me, Miss Marple. It's the case, of course, but also, well, it's you, the way you brought the truth to light, not just about the murder, but about the family. You gave them something to hold on to, something beyond the pain." Miss Marple's eyes twinkled behind her spectacles. "The truth is a gift, Hastings, but it is not always enough. People need hope, a reason to go on." Lady Evelyn understood that, and her clues, the brooch, the locket, the garden, were her way of ensuring her family would find it. "I merely helped them see what was already there." Hastings nodded, his gaze drifting to the horizon where the spire of Greystone Manor was just visible above the treetops. "Do you think they'll be all right? Sir Reginald, Charles, Mrs. Winthrop, Beatrice, they've lost so much." Miss Marple followed his gaze, her expression thoughtful. "They have lost, yes, but they have also gained. They have seen the fragility of their bonds and the strength that lies in mending them. Sir Reginald will tend the garden, Charles will learn caution, Mrs. Winthrop will find forgiveness, and Beatrice will grow in courage. They are not the same family they were, but they are a family still." The train's whistle sounded again, closer now, and the platform vibrated with the rumble of the approaching engine. Hastings shifted his weight, a question lingering in his mind. "And what about you, Miss Marple? You've solved another mystery, tied up every loose end. Don't you ever tire of it? The secrets, the betrayals, the weight of it all." Miss Marple's smile was serene, her eyes distant as if seeing beyond the station, beyond the village. "Tire, Hastings, perhaps at times, but the human heart is a garden full of beauty and thorns. To tend it, to uncover its truths, is a privilege. My little gray cells, as you know, are restless. They find joy in the puzzle, in the order that comes from chaos. And besides," she added, her voice lightening, "there are roses waiting for me in St. Mary Mead, and they will not tend themselves." Hastings laughed, the sound breaking the solemnity of the moment. "You and your roses, Miss Marple. I swear they're as much a part of your mysteries as your knitting." She inclined her head, a playful glint in her eyes. "And why not? A rose, like a clue, reveals its secrets only to those who look closely. You would do well to remember that, Hastings." The train pulled into the station, its brakes hissing as it slowed to a stop. The porter approached, offering to take their luggage, but Miss Marple waved him off with a polite smile, insisting she could manage her small case. As they boarded the train, Hastings glanced back at the village, the memory of Greystone Manor's rose garden vivid in his mind. The tarnished brooch, the silver spoon, the gold locket, they were more than clues. They were symbols of a family's love and loss, pieced together by Miss Marple's unerring insight. They settled into their seats, the carriage cozy with the scent of polished wood and the faint hum of conversation from other passengers. Miss Marple opened her reticule, pulling out her knitting, and her needles began their familiar rhythm. a steady counterpoint to the train's gentle sway. Hastings watched her, his heart full of gratitude for their friendship, for the quiet brilliance that had brought justice to Greystone Manor. "You'll write to me, won't you?" he said, his voice soft. "When you're back in St. Mary Mead, tending your roses and solving the village's little mysteries?" Miss Marple's smile was warm, her eyes crinkling with affection. "Of course, Hastings. And you must visit, when you can. There is always a cup of tea and a puzzle waiting for you." The train lurched forward, carrying them away from the village, from the manor, from the echoes of Lady Evelyn's life and death. As the countryside rolled past, Hastings leaned back, a sense of peace settling over him. The mystery of the Tarnished Brooch was solved, its truths laid bare. But the greater mystery, the enduring strength of the human spirit, would linger, tended by the gentle hands of Miss Marple, as timeless as the roses she loved.